Welcome to Placecast, a local policy innovation partnership hub production based at the University of Birmingham. Placecast is essential listening for those keen to explore the ins and outs of knowledge mobilisation for influence in central and local government, based on the view that it is only through animating the power of place-based leadership that the wicked problems of 2026 can become more manageable. Whether you're a researcher, citizen scientist, an activist, a professional working within the public sector, a civil servant, politician, analyst, or entrepreneur, we think that it's through our networks that most solutions can be assembled, tested, and the learning shared before we go again, and that universities can act as the repositories and observatories of these efforts. We're based in City-REDI and rooted in the LPIP programme funded by the ESRC, AHRC, and Innovate UK. This podcast aims to highlight knowledge and evidence base, ways of working, and the strategies needed to make a real impact on the decisions that shape our society. Our guests are change makers from across the UK with stories about the ways in which influence can be achieved. We focus in particular on some of the connective tissue within and between sectors for clues as to how to animate place-based leadership, as innovating is a team sport best done in the open. Please contact us with feedback on the episodes, or if you'd like to be a guest, or have strong or strident views on the processes of advocacy, lobbying, public campaigning and more, unpacking how research and evidence connect with neighbourhood, local, city, regional and national missions. My guest this morning is Kevin Fenning, who has a long and illustrious career as an economic development consultant. Morning, Kevin.
Hi, Nicola.
We're here to talk about some work that you've done as part of being an LPIP policy fellow like me. So what you were looking into is the role of AI in kind of enabling everything else that local government does. What made you interested in that to start with?
So I think as we were starting with the fellowship program at the LPIP Hub, we were asked to think about some of the most pressing issues that were facing local government at the moment. And it seemed very clear from initial conversations, and this was happening about this time last year, so about the middle of 2025, that we knew that artificial intelligence was a really big deal for everyone. We can kind of see it in our everyday lives as much as anything else. And we knew it was a big deal for local authorities, but we didn't really know exactly how it was changing them. There was some really good work coming out of the Local Government Association, but it was really important, we felt, to kind of think about not only what's happening at the moment, although that's a useful thing to capture as well, but to think about where local government was going next and the exciting and very fast moving sort of technology that underpins all of this, and just think about what that meant for local government. So that's really the root of the study.
And just to be clear, a lot of work that you've done has been about finding improvements within local authorities or within delivery contexts. So that was the link. It was doing the business better, or were you interested in technology per se?
Yeah, so I've got a kind of economic development background, but this study isn't really focused on the economic development aspects of artificial intelligence. So what AI means for different growth sectors and what it means for the labour markets and so on. This was really focused on how AI could be used by local government in order to carry out local government services. And so that was really the focus, and just sort of thinking about the operational side of local authorities.
And just been reading through all the recommendations, and I would recommend the excellent summary that is on the LPIP website of the project. One of the things I found really interesting was you talk about there being humans in the loop. Can you say something about that?
I think one of the greatest challenges and concerns with AI is that you end up with a sort of black box situation where AI is making decisions and it becomes very hard to interrogate. I think in the context of local government, that could lead to lots of negative outcomes, but it could be really corrosive in terms of public trust. And we know that public trust is already an issue. So being very clear and deliberative in your use of AI when it supports decision making, having humans in the loop to check what AI is doing, to check the decisions that are being suggested, because I think in most cases at the moment, AI is only ever suggesting things. And I've not seen a case where AI is sort of making decisions for local authorities at any level of significance. So that human in the loop is really important. I think we also kind of see it in other sectors, in business contexts, in wider contexts. If we're thinking about, for for example, the Ukraine war and the use of AI and drones in terms of sort of attacking the Russians, as it were, actually having humans in the loop there is very important. And local government, clearly a lot of the implications of using AI and what that means for local people, it's really important that there's that sort of transparency there as well.
So it's having your local government officer in the loop as well as the AI.
Indeed.
I think we're some way off sort of things becoming autonomous cybernetic decision-making systems. When you looked at 101 examples of AI being used, was there any that surprised you about how far it had gone?
I think the most surprising was in terms of the use of robotics. We found a couple of robotics examples. So, one using AI robots to identify cracks in the road and also to fix those. So, the AI was built into a robot that was able to travel along bits of roadway, identify cracks, and then put some sort of temporary repair in to stop that crack becoming worse. That was really interesting. You could see how immediately how that was scaled up. And the other one was quite niche. It was a sort of agricultural robot that looked through fields for ragwort, which is a plant that if cattle eat it, they can get very sick. So it was using AI to identify the ragwort, and then I think it was being removed separately. We can think of lots of different use cases where we want AI to spot things for us or to collect data by going out and looking for things. And so I think this kind of confluence of AI and robotics is really, really interesting.
Well, people sort of, when it comes to any innovation, it's about how absorptive the setting is in which it lands. Did you find in general that local government was enthusiastic and kind of ready to absorb the innovation of AI, or were people a bit more skeptical?
I think there's a whole range of different emotions and reactions to AI. And I think sort of stepping back, what's interesting, or one of the points you make about the context in all of this landing is we're in an environment where lots of people feel as though AI is a bit scary. It's a bit scary in terms of labor markets. It's a bit scary in terms of the kind of black box that we talked about a minute ago. It's not been that long since the Horizon sort of postal incident, for example. You can see black boxes going wrong. So there is that wariness that sort of sits at the back of people thinking about AI. At the same time, local government is beset by chronic challenges associated with finances, lack of capacity, aging populations, which increase the demand for services. The other side of the coin is that it can feel like the AI can feel like it's the holy grail. It's the thing that we can do to solve our problems, to give us massively more capacity than we have at the moment and really address the challenges we've got. So I think you see a range, really. You see everything from this is brilliant, let's do something about it, without always necessarily having a clear vision for what that means. And I think there's a lot of, in some cases, the leadership will be very enthusiastic and then officers are kind of trying to work through what does this actually mean in practice. At the other end, we've got people that are quite cautious. And then in the middle, we've got lots of people who are sort of, well, we'll use it where it's really clear that it's going to be beneficial. Because I think the other thing that we haven't quite got onto and sort of touched on yet is that AI at the moment is a cost center. And so it's still something that needs conscious investment in to make it happen.
You know the world of local government and local authorities very well. Can you imagine that reversing and AI becoming something which had transformational potential and was sort of fully embedded within the work of local government? The sort of much more transformational end of local government. Can you imagine what the size of the prize might be of fully enabled AI in local government?
It's a very good question. That's a very complex question. So I guess one area that we see particularly sort of dramatic uptake and usage is in the area of social care, around social care note taking. Social workers spend a lot of time with the time that they spend with clients. They're spending having to write down, fill in information, take notes on their interactions. Then they have a lot of paperwork that they have to sort of follow up afterwards. And the benefit of AI in that context is you can use the AI to take the notes. That means you as a social worker are more engaged with the person because you're not having to worry about the note being taken. The AI will fill in any kind of templates and any reporting that you need for you. And then you should do a check for that to make sure that it's accurate, correct. There's several examples of quite dramatic decreases in the amount of time that takes, sort of 50, 60% is being claimed in some instances for that particular type of work. And when you think about the area of social care, this is not necessarily an area of local government where you would necessarily go, oh, that's a very sort of tech savvy part of local government. That's really going to get it. It's being taken up because it's seen to be working and because it's really helping not only clients and the end user, but also workers to work in a more human way. So that's really been taken up quite enthusiastic. I think in that there's a microcosm that sort of speaks to your wider question, what could we do with this? If we kind of tease that apart, you still need to check the note at the end of the day. So you still need to make sure that you're sort of verifying what's gone in there. We've seen some really good reporting about how that can go wrong. So simple things like bias. So if you take the same case and you've got Mr. Smith who has certain care needs and you have Mrs. Smith with identical care needs, the machine might interpret that in different ways depending on just the gender of the person. So you need to be really on the ball, making sure that nothing's going wrong. So that's really important. You've got to work with your residents. So residents have to feel comfortable with it. It's not going to work in all cases. So it may be that there's some people feel uncomfortable about it. And so you won't be able to apply AI there. So I think it's a useful kind of microcosm for some of the issues that local government will have to think about.
Were there any authorities that were particularly leaning towards working well with AI? Can you think of an example? And again, was that about they were particularly future oriented? Did they have the resource? Was it about necessity as at the top? We're very familiar with doing more with less, kind of being this sort of permanent state for local government. Or were there just people that were leaning particularly into, had an interest in what could the tech do for them?
I think you do see a big divide between different local authorities. I think as we start to look forward, that's one of the things that we'll need to sort of change and to respond to. So there is a kind of Matthew effect where those who have the most get more. And you see the bigger local authorities with more resource have more ability to invest in this. It does very much come down to people. And I think two types of people. So the technical people and the experts and their ability to try things out, their willingness to take on risk, to work with contractors in the right way, because that's a big part of the sort of soup of all of this stuff coming together. And I think also leadership as well. So you need a leadership that's prepared to try things that will put the right kind of governance in place that is responsible but not overbearing and that sort of prevents things from going as fast as they could do. But you also need those sort of technical experts as well. So I think you tend to see it in the larger authorities and those authorities where you've got people who are particularly have those kinds of skills and are prepared to sort of step up and make things happen.
Can you see a scenario under which an authority would come to you and say, what can we do about AI? I mean, surely it'd be on a use case basis and finding a value proposition within. It's not going to be general purpose in a way. It's much more about specificity.
One of the clear themes that comes out of the report is that you need to see AI as one tool in the toolkit. Even before you get to open the toolkit, you've got to be thinking about what's the challenge that we're responding to here? What's the issue? And one officer put it to me really well. You know, if somebody comes along with an issue, you've got to start by questioning the process. What do you need this for? So the example of, well, we want AI to take minutes of this meeting, as much as do we need this meeting? Who's using, what is this for? What's it achieving? Assuming you do need the meeting, do you need the minutes? Who's reading these minutes? What are they used for? What do you actually need to record here? Embedding AI within a reflective process where you're looking at what you're actually doing and sort of able to sort of strip away elements as much as add them. That's really important. And then, of course, in some cases, you might not need AI at all. You might need simpler automation, which is more rules-based, because the value of something like an LLM technology is it can be creative, which can be useful in some cases, but not in others. So really using the right AI or the right digital tool for the job if you need to.
That's the fascinating part, is that it redefines business as usual in a much more kind of rigorous, exactly, why do we have this area committee? Because we've always had an area committee. Or is it actually improving our decision making? I tell you what, the thing that really occurred to me was this point about interpretation, because as you'll know, so much of the work of planning committees, for example, what is grounds for a planning appeal or what isn't, you would think is a fairly rule-oriented set of things. But as everybody that's ever been involved in the planning process, there is so much interpretation around rules as written. I'd be really interested to see how far AI could help with the local plan making process, as well as kind of examinations in public and things like that.
Yes, we've seen examples of, we refer to them in the report, around AI being used to assess planning submissions. So there's lots of high volume of paperwork that comes in for plans and local plan making. How do you use AI to go through and assess those? And there's some really interesting kind of time saving examples of that. But I think it also sort of touches on another aspect of this, which we bring up in the report, which is about the fact that this isn't just a local authority technology. It's not just a supply side technology. It's also a consumer technology as well. And the consumer technology that residents have is as good probably as what local authorities have. And so there's the case of planning is really interesting because what we're starting to see is that residents are using AI to draft planning objections. There are services online where you can get the AI to draft a planning objection for you. And that is a sort of a negative of AI, I guess, from a local authority perspective, is that you're now seeing quite large volumes of AI written planning objections, complaints, things like that, some of which refer to legislation correctly and some of which do not.
We've talked about the social care use case, we've talked about the planning use case. Is there any other corners of local government activity that you'd like to mention as honourable examples from your research?
So I think we're seeing it used on quite a wide range. What we've described it in the report as a long tail of uses. So there's a kind of core of uses which are LLM based. So some of them are kind of fairly obvious in terms of using things like Copilot typically, because many local authorities have access to the Microsoft Suite products. So that's a sort of natural add-on for them. So lots of LLM usage and sort of various ways in that which that's being used for sort of transcription, note taking, and so on. There's also quite a lot of chatbots, so text chatbots, sort of customer facing chatbots in particular, but also voice based chatbots. And then there's a long tail, as we put it, of different things. I've mentioned kind of robotics so far. We've got some examples of kind of predictive analytics. So if you've got partial EPC information for your area, you might use a sort of predictive analytics type AI to fill in the gaps based on what you know about the remaining properties. We've had one example of fraud detector. So kind of looking at using AI to look at citizen records and sort of understand where people might be fraudulently claiming local benefits or using a house that they're not entitled to. So that's quite interesting. We've got an example from Westminster where they have looked at advertising hoardings which weren't paying business rates. So they've used a kind of combination of Google Maps to see where the advertising hoardings are and looking at the VOA data and seeing is there a gap there between what's actually there and what's in our data, what we're collecting business rates for. And there's quite a few examples of care setting technologies, so various kinds of sensor technologies which either use audio or visual cues to pick up if someone's had a fall or if they're in trouble in some kind of distress. So there's lots of interesting examples. And I think one of the things that's sort of tantalizing for me is these will tend to be sort of passion projects, either from a commissioning perspective or a development perspective from a local authority angle, but they have a huge amount of relevance for other local authorities. And so one of the things I think that's really important is that we look at these passion project applications and think about how we scale them up, because if you multiply that across 300 local authorities, and that you start to get some real strength and power to this.
So you mentioned working with the LGA at the beginning. Is that a good way of taking the work into that learning? You know, the learning loops and the feedback within local government can always feel slightly haphazard, I think, but there are good organisations that can help to share good practice. Are you continuing to work with the LGA on this?
Hoping to have a conversation with the LGA very soon, actually, about this. And I would say that the LGA's research and its sort of survey of members has been invaluable. And we definitely cite it in the research. It's the best objective measure of how use is changing overall. I would say alongside the LGA, you've also got other industry sort of sector bodies in terms of Socratim and Lottie and others that are doing some really important work to think about AI and the practical application of it, to share best practice, to share that sort of networking approach. And I think also government is doing a really important job. We've got sort of GDS local, we've got local AI within MHCLG. There's lots of important work that's coming together. I think what will be really important is looking at how we create that loop and that join up between what are the challenges and what are the issues that we need to address that AI could potentially address, and thinking that through carefully, developing solutions that are mindful of what local government actually needs, and then also sort of taking solutions that arise organically and thinking about how we scale them up and how we sort of package them up so that they can be used across the sector reasonably easily. Joining all of those things up will be really important to maximizing the benefit from this.
And I guess also, I think it's fair to say that you've done an excellent state of the art as of now. It'd be really interesting to revisit 18 months, 2 years, 3, 5 years out to see how far the adoption is moving I guess the concern is always, and you mentioned the Horizon scandal and the post offices, that was a computer system that sort of had bugs and had errors in it. The worry is that that shadow is cast over the ability to use tech for good.
Yes, and I think those concerns should always be in our minds. I don't think that any of these challenges are going away. I think it's possible that AI becomes more accurate and better at guessing what we mean when we say things. But I think we can get quite philosophical about this. There are some fundamental challenges around communication, whether that's human to human communication or human to AI to human communication. How do I communicate what I think? I have to be able to articulate what I think. I have to be able to communicate to you in a way that you understand. You have to understand it. And I think those are just fundamental challenges. And I think that they change when we add AI into the picture. They can get more complicated. So I think we always need to be looking at, well, what is AI producing, and making sure that we have an appropriate range of checks given the potential for things going wrong. I think as we go forward, we will always be kind of torn between, this is a very, very powerful technology that can do a whole range of very good things, and yet it can go wrong. And we'll continue to navigate through that path.
We've been watching the Grace and Perry series, and some people that have been involved in the early development of AI, I mean, they really were kind of, off-grid, hiding on compounds, kind of. The reason I think it's interesting, and the local authorities are service providers of many, many things, but they also have their democratic anchorage. And the way that we are using technology changes some of our notion about ourselves as citizens and all that kind of thing. I think it's nothing but interesting stuff to come. It would be interesting to revisit how far local government is able to adopt for good, but as well as keeping some of those guardrails up, as you say in the report. Now, in terms of any change, I was wondering, say you have a long experience of working with local government in all its incarnations. One thing that you really need to make things change are really good brokers on the ground. So people who are able to advocate, not necessarily for the technology, but for the kind of change process that you've described. Can you think of any specific people in the sector that are really good brokers that you've come across?
A really good question. I suspect there are some really good brokers in place. And I think a lot of that work is happening in terms of the organizations that I've sort of touched on already. So you could think about brokerage in a few different ways. So you can think about brokerage as between the sector, and we've talked about the kind of local government associations, Socatim, Lottie, others, and I think central government agencies in terms of GDS Local and Local AI within MHCLG, they are doing that work as well, and they are consciously encouraging the networks that they need to succeed, and that's all really positive. So I think there's brokerage happening there, and that's really positive. I think there's also a kind of brokerage with society and kind of work that's happening with groups of residents, with communities, to think through what this means. And I think there's some really interesting work that's happening in Liverpool, Camden, Manchester, and probably lots of other places as well, where we're seeing different kind of councils, different kinds of engagement with society. I think one of the other things that's interesting is it starts to come together with the use of AI itself, because we also have seen a really interesting example of how AI is being used to support citizen engagement, managed and supported by humans, but enabling you to do much wider sort of consultation than you might otherwise be able to do. So that sort of these things start to come together. But I think that kind of brokerage with residents and sort of working through, how do we use this? How could we use this? What would be beneficial is also a really important part of the puzzle as well.
And then, of course, there are the brokers that need to liaise between local government and then the commercial contracting side. And that obviously, and again, a large guardrail is going to be around local government getting good value for money when it goes out buying these kind of things at scale. Procurement process has always been a kind of core strength of local authorities, but if they are having to enter into this very leading edge kind of commercial space with tech companies and goodness knows who, then I guess procurement will become a key brokerage between the purchaser and the provider.
Yeah, there are a few kind of not warning signs, but there are a few things that local authorities that we spoke to were very kind of conscious that they were sort of having to negotiate through. So a lot of the technology is very new. It's changing very rapidly. You've got lots of people in the market who are trying to represent their products or their technology in one way. Some of them are essentially selling kind of tech demos. Some of them are selling a process whereby they use the local authority's own data to create things, which can be beneficial, but there also is a huge risk in giving away your data or access to data, however anonymized and protected, to a private company to make something happen. And I think, local authorities are rightly deeply wary of that. So I think another challenge for local authorities, as you say, is how do we kind of get the right partner? How do we make sure we procure or work with them in the right way? Particularly, how do we avoid technological lock-in, where actually things are going on around us that mean that our solution is now obsolete, or you can do it much cheaper than we've been sold. And I think local authorities are used to this challenge, but it is a big challenge for local authorities to buy large scale IT contracts anytime, IT products anytime. So I don't think this is in a sense, this is not a new thing. It's just even more complicated than it's always been because the technology is moving so fast.
Philosophically speaking, I suppose local government in some ways is a generalized broker of various types, in terms of what it buys, how it provides services. And I guess it is just another way in which you emphasize how it sits at the intersections of so many different complex systems. And then by the actual subject being about IT systems, it serves to highlight some of that complexity and some of those sorts of trade-offs within local government, and makes it more visible how to move forwards. And I was wondering also if your 101 examples, if they are sort of first movers in a sense, and if there is some risk in being first to the party in that way, as you say. Later sort of iterations, I guess in a sense, AI serves to interrogate everything that we do as local government in a way that maybe the sector isn't entirely prepared for.
Yes, so I think there's definitely, as you say, your first attempt at something. And these are, in many cases, if we're not talking about sort of co-pilot or established technology, we are talking about things that are probably being done for the first time. There's a certain experimental quality to them. But even where you establish a solution that uses AI, I think there's something really important about not just resting on your laurels, or it's really important that that doesn't become the end point. It's a solution in time. And local authority officers said this to us, that one of the challenges for IT and transformation specialists within local authorities is it can take a long time to get a new solution in place, but then everyone sort of gets happy with it and it becomes the end thing. And then something better comes along, something that can improve productivity even more, or can help in it another way. And then you've got to go through, rather than sort of having that sense of transiency or that sense of, this is that flexibility, you can get quite stuck on what is clearly just another solution at a given point. And so I think that's quite important. I think you also touched on the complexity of local government, and in regards to IT systems and AI systems, the risk is that you end up with lots of different things. So you end up with a chatbot over here for your rubbish service and a chatbot over there for your benefits, and actually this multiplicity of different systems is part of the challenge for local government. How do you get things to join up in a way? Because some of the benefits of AI and sort of really deep analysis of data that the local government holds that would provide solutions requires you to join that data together, requires you to be able to have different systems to speak to each other. There are a whole host of challenges that local authorities are kind of having to navigate through around those system interoperability issues, data cleanliness issues, data speaking to each other, and so on.
Absolutely. And the challenge of interoperability across used to be seen as a coordination and a political and a administrative challenge. But then not having solved that side of the challenge, you then suddenly end up in tech. I worked for a couple of years for a data company, and interoperability with public service was a major break actually on our public market ability, really. Imagine we've got then our really good brokers, human and non-human, working effectively. They need somewhere to dock, and in local government, of course, the place leadership role is kind of increasing in visibility, and more people talking about this kind of, and certainly LPIP is associated with place leadership of a certain type. Can you think of a place or a place leader where the brokerage works well and docks effectively with good place leaders?
I don't think it's always tempting when you write a policy report to sort of the one group to bind them all, or whatever the Lord of the Rings reference is. And, it's always tempting to kind of go with that. I think we've got an ecosystem which is doing quite a lot for local government. I mean, I would say one of the things that was really pleasing to experience is local government is on top of this, despite all of the challenges that are going on. There's lots of really impressive work going on in the sector, across the sector, and I think central government is making the right moves to support the sector as well. So I think there's a really good ecosystem of organisations. I think the test or the challenge for central government is to make sure that the very clever people who are putting together these different kinds of systems at a central level are actually genuinely engaging with, and not just sort of talking to, but actually engaged with and working with people from local government, because that will be important not only to ensure that their solutions genuinely work, but that they're actually adopted because they've taken people on that journey already. I think it will be important for central government to make sure that they're able to scale up local solutions. And I think that can be hard sometimes. It's always nice to work on your own thing, and it's messy to work with somebody else's solution. And, you might think it's always got problems here or there, but it's going to be really important to identify good stuff that's going on and think, oh, actually, how can we make this work so that it's easy to kind of copy and paste it across 300 authorities? Because that's where a lot of value will be. I think for local authorities, it's about having a mindset of where are there solutions that kind of work within the context of what we're trying to do? Where can we learn from other places? I think that touches on a point that we've not really explored so far, which is about evidence. So I think one thing that we talk about in the report is the need for stronger evidence. So there's some really big claims, big percentages, big numbers being thrown out in some case studies, but there's still, to speak to that point about local authorities that feel less confident, how do they know where the actual use cases are that really make a difference? And so I think one role, to go back to your question, one role for, I think, particularly central government, but working in partnership with local authorities, is to do some really robust studies of how this stuff adds value and where it adds value. And we talk about that in the report too.
Wouldn't it be awful if all the first mover, early in interest, people that were really putting time and energy and effort into it, it ends up being that their projects are not the ones which end up really making the big savings or shifting the dial? I guess that's part of the thing as local government officers. You're very adaptive to kind of what comes next and having to view it. My concern would be that, again, learning loops are quite often quite ruptured sometimes, and people do complain about a lack of institutional memory from one set of projects or place-based initiatives to another. Seeing the whole thing as a system-wide challenge that we try to trap the learning and the evidence and the story, as it were, because you can imagine everybody starting again in a different place with a different set of actors over and over again. I guess that would be the main downside, despite the warnings of the sort of tin hat brigade. This is kind of with us and we have to make the best of it. And I guess seeing the kind of world of transformation that the local government is in, I think always, because necessity being the mother of invention, local government is quite inventive in that it's been strapped for cash as long as I've been alive, really. So austerity wasn't a specific set of policies, it was that as need rises and capability kind of remains the same. So I can see how it would be incredibly attractive for some people within local government to see it as a very useful horizon that they'll be moving towards. I find it really interesting, and it does feel to me like you've kind of definitely established base camp for AI use, but where it goes next, there's more than one way up the mountain, isn't there?
That's absolutely right. I mean, I think articulate that the sector has established what the base camp is, and there's loads of interesting work that's going on, and loads of really positive work. I mean, and I have worked a lot with local government. I guess one fear going into this was that we'd have conversations. Sometimes you have conversations with local government officers. Oh, we know we need to do this, but we haven't done it because of time and money and whatever, and it's slightly cheap, and everyone feels bad about talking about that. This isn't that. There's some really good stuff going. We just need to think about how we scale up. Well, your point about that sort of political economy of how do you do rapid change in organizations that are often sensibly and reasonably quite risk averse. I think the best way is to get that infrastructure that I've talked about working in the right way. So if you've got the evidence, if you've got the trust between central and local, if you've got people who are sort of experimenting and have the time and space and brain space to experiment, and then something changes, and you've got that environment that sits at the heart of local authority that allows you to do this stuff, well, then the case that you're making back to home base is, well, it's already been used here. It's this much better than this. I know we changed 6 months ago, but this is actually better. We can implement it in 3 weeks. And we know that because it's documented here. And so the case that you're making becomes that much easier to make. back to politicians and leaders and senior officers who might otherwise feel, oh, didn't we just do this, a few months ago or whatever. So I think that's probably how you manage it.
And I think viewing local places as kind of continual test beds for adapting and experimenting and iterative learning, I think that's the bit that really excites me, is that with or without the technology itself, it's partly about a mental shift.
Yes.
Away from a risk averse kind of computer says no sort of attitude into a sort of quite exciting, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is really exciting when you consider the challenges that local authorities face and the service provision and the importance of the work that they do. The work that they do sort of touches directly on the lives of individuals and communities. And so there's something really powerful about this. I think we should all be kind of really invested in wanting this to work. I think one thing that you just sort of touched on that we haven't talked about too much here about that, that's the confidence bit, comes from knowing that you have a team that understands AI. And I think if there was one sort of gap or challenge at the moment, it's that AI is not necessarily universally understood, or people don't always have a good understanding of what AI is good for, what it's not so good at. And so I think that sort of staff training piece is really important. That point was made to us really from several different organizations as a real challenge and to sort of making this work. And local authorities can feel more confident about trying things out when they know that they've got a team that really understands what AI is for and what it's not for.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I've really enjoyed this genuinely mind-expanding conversation. I'm thinking about millions of areas at once. However, the technology that I have for you is a little bit more lo-fi. I'm going to let you have a wave with the place-based innovation magic wand. Careful with it. It can grant a wish. You have absolute power to do one of these things, but you must use your powers to make a tangible change to a specific place. Your change will be specific, measurable, actionable, recordable and transferable. Smart. Magic is hard to get hold of at the moment and is subject to a 20% reducing multi-year budget settlement. You may have £10 million project fund, half an hour with the cabinet and a slide deck. Someone did suggest half an hour with the cabinet and a slightly more threatening thing on the slide deck, but yes. Editorial control of the front page of a tabloid newspaper. A clause to insert into a bill. You can have your own, since Parliament's proroguing today, you can have a whole new bill for the King's speech of the end of the year. You can have a simple message to go viral on TikTok. Anyone as an advocate work, or, and this is one for the real mega nerds, you can have the answer to something that's bothered you forever in this area. What would you like to do?
So it's a tantalizing menu you've set out, Nicola. I think the sort of points that we've already discussed are really the thing that we need. So I'd probably take the money. I would think about a really clever way of working with GDS Local and Local AI and making sure that we have the money to bring local authorities into that conversation space to make sure that the work that's being done centrally and what's happening locally really does genuinely come together. Because I think if we do that, that's going to be really, really powerful because there's lots of interesting stuff going on. We've got, we haven't even had a chance to touch on, local authorities coming up with their own sort of chatbot technology, voice chatbot technology using what's out there. I'm sure there's other really interesting examples as well. So I just feel that would be the thing that's really important. And I'm actually sort of hopeful that some of that is already happening. So I think this is one where it's slightly boring use of the magic wand, but I think that's what I would do with it.
The secret is nearly everyone actually takes the money. This is basically the secret, although some people do take legislation. But I think actually in your case, it wouldn't be beyond the wit of man to develop that, because you'd be partnering with commercial entities, it would be an endowment rather than a fund. You could probably make a reasonable case that there would be money coming in as well as money going out of this ecosystem that you've described. So yes, you can have £10 million. The check's in the post. So thank you so much for joining us, Kevin. We set out to mine insights from experts, that's you, real world case studies. I really recommend the report with its 101 examples, practical tips, not sure about that, and career advice. We've certainly pointed out some of the challenges for people that are minded to work within local government over the next generation, and spotlighting AI solutions as well as waving the place-based innovation magic wand, and we have. Thank you.
Brilliant. Really good to speak to you, Nicola, and really good to be on Placecast.
Thank you.